Take a little trip with me, I'm gonna take you home.
Take a little history
Take a little
down this lane of memories.
down this lane.
So let's raise another glass for the glorious past and the friends we have become. Yeah, yeah, 'cause little did we know the good times come and go, but the best is yet to come.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Was last Sunday's display of the showering of petals, flypasts, army bands playing outside hospitals, and naval ships lighting up in harbours the best and right way for the armed services to honour India's corona warriors? And secondly, what will be the implications of the terrible financial crunch the country faces on the armed services as well as their modernisation? Those are two key issues I shall explore today with India's former Navy Chief, Admiral Arun Prakash. Admiral Prakash joins us by Skype from Goa. Admiral Prakash, let's start with Sunday's salute to the COVID warriors by the armed forces. They carried out flypasts, there was showering of petals, bands played outside hospitals, and ships switched on their lights. Do you believe this was the best and the right way for the armed services to honor COVID warriors?
Well, there may be other ways of doing this, but I think the time called for it, that we boost the morale of people who are working hard in a situation of dire emergency. And if the armed forces could contribute to the lifting of morale of doctors and nurses and paramedical staff and everybody who's contributing to this situation, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But of course, having said that, there is much more that the armed forces could have done over and above this display, which I hope help lift the morale of the corona the warriors.
It's that much more that I want to talk to you about. In a tweet that you put out, you referred to the deep resources that the armed services have in terms of transport, logistics, medical facilities, and manpower. How could these resources have been used, A, for the medics who need it, and B, perhaps, as your tweet mentioned, for migrants who are walking back destitute to their villages?
Well, as you know, the armed forces have huge resources. They have huge organization, and all it takes is for the government of India to call upon these resources, marshal them, and send them out to help people who need them the most. I mean, watching the migrants trying to go home was a heartrending sight for any Indian citizen. And if there was any way we could have ameliorated that, including the use of the armed forces, even though it put them at certain amount of risk, I think was worth taking. We've all seen watched scenes of women and children on the roads walking for miles, for hours, without food, without succor. If the Indian state, could have helped make sure that didn't happen, even if it involved the use of the armed forces, I think it was worth doing. And this is not over yet. People are still on the roads and they are nowhere near their homes.
Do you think the government should have called upon the armed forces to make their resources available to help the migrants?
Well, the armed forces are at the disposal of the government, and the government can call upon them at any point of time to render help to the citizens. Of course, it means exposing them to a certain amount of risk, but then that's a cost-benefit analysis, whether risking armed forces who are in any case expected to risk themselves against helping hundreds of thousands of women, children on the roads, helpless, starving, begging for food. They've been on the roads for days and days, from whatever I hear. So surely the government had to balance whether these helpless citizens needed the assistance of the armed forces, which are an instrument of the state, to be used at the discretion of the government of India.
You're giving me the feeling, but you haven't put it in so many words, that you believe, although it's a difficult call, the government should have called upon the armed services. You have these resources, they can be used, they should have been used.
Yes, I think they should have been used. If citizens of India are in distress, women and children are on the roads, the armed forces have a tremendous amount of resources. They have the organization, and they can jump into this kind of a situation blindfolded and render instant succor. And perhaps the time to do that was a few weeks ago, but even now it's perhaps not too late. Yes, you will be exposing the armed forces to a certain amount of risk, but that's a risk you have to take, whether your citizens need the help and succor at this point of time, or the welfare of the armed forces comes before that.
One of the things that happened on Sunday was that WhatsApp had images of Air Force helicopters showering petals on migrants literally walking back destitute with their children on their heads, thousands or hundreds of miles. Now, no one knows for certain whether those images are fake or whether they are real. The problem is that if those images are believed, and often fake is believed, then does it convey an appropriate and fitting image of the armed services?
Well, I sincerely hope that they are fake. I haven't seen any of these myself, but it would be most inappropriate to go and shower petals on people who are starving and on the roads in distress. It could have been a mistake also. They may have let go of petals at the wrong place, but I sincerely hope that that's not true and it wasn't done.
One more question about this. This whole event was made public and announced at a press conference conducted by the Chief of Defense Staff along with the three service chiefs. I believe this is the first time four four-star officers have held a press conference together. But was this the right subject for their first press conference, or should this have been announced by the services PROs instead?
Well, the services have many means at their disposal for disseminating information of this kind, including PROs and defense PROs, and each service has its own mechanism. And before they actually came on TV, there was a lot of speculation and there was anticipation that they are going to make an announcement of some considerable significance. But as it turned out, it was an anticlimax that the three chiefs and the chief of defense staff were all together there. In a way, it's not bad. They interacted with the media, etc., and made known to them. But it could have been done otherwise. I don't think it's ever happened before. It's sort of unprecedented, and I don't think the occasion called for the three chiefs and the chief of defense staff to come and announce issues which are not of any great significance.
Let me turn to something else, Admiral Prakash. On the 15th of April, Lieutenant General Raju, the head of 15th Corps in Srinagar, told the BBC that the army had, and I'm quoting, received intelligence inputs. Pakistan is pushing a lot of coronavirus cases into Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And then he added, and again I'm quoting, these people coming from across the LOC could be carriers of COVID-19. 1 week later, Dilbag Singh, the Director General of Police in Jammu and Kashmir, told PTI, and again I'm quoting, it is a matter of concern that Pakistan is pushing COVID-19 infected militants from across the LOC. Now it is exporting coronavirus patients to infect people of Kashmir. And my question is simple. How do these gentlemen know this? Are they carrying out tests, or are they simply speculating?
Well, I'm afraid I haven't come across these reports, but it seems a bit far-fetched to me, because if a man is infected with coronavirus, then he's not really in a position to climb high mountain passes and carry 20 to 30 kgs on his back. So most likely he'll collapse somewhere on the way. But again, I mean, even then, I think as a deliberate ploy from the other side, I don't think it's a very good idea. So perhaps they were thinking of something else when they made these statements, and it shouldn't be difficult to prove or disprove. Many of them have been killed and their bodies are available. A postmortem would either prove or disprove any of these statements. But it seems, on the face of it, it seems unlikely that this kind of biological warfare would be launched from the other side, because it can work both ways, and it's a very dangerous kind of situation to even contemplate.
I'll tell you why I asked that question, because the problem is, at the moment, there is a very worrying increase of militant activity, terrorism, in fact, in Jammu and Kashmir. In the last 1 month, 18 army personnel have been killed, including a major and colonel last weekend. And India is galvanizing its diplomatic service to point out internationally the role that Pakistan is playing. In that atmosphere, This sort of apparent loose talk by either the head of 50th Corps or the DGP of police can't be helpful. It gives Pakistan such an obvious denial point that our attempt to say Pakistan is pushing terror gets undermined.
Well, perhaps a little more thought should have been given to, before making a statement of this nature. But according to the army chief, this is a par for the course. I mean, this time of the year, when the passes are opening, this kind of influx by terrorists, etc., is nothing abnormal. That's what he said in that interview. So I think we need to be a little more careful about making statements which can be misinterpreted or wrongly interpreted and cause panic in the field.
Let's take a break at that point, Admiral Prakash. When I come back, I want to address the second part of this interview, the impact that the financial crunch is going to have on the armed forces and more particularly on their critical modernization. We'll be back in a moment's time, but first, a message from our sponsor, Glenlivet.
Take a little trip with me, I'm gonna take you home.
Take a little history
Take a little
down this lane of memory.
down this lane.
So let's raise another glass for the glorious past and the friends we have become. Yeah, yeah, 'cause little did we know the good times come and go, but the best is yet to come.
Welcome back to a special interview for The Wire. My guest is India's former Navy Chief, Admiral Arun Prakash. He joins us by Skype from Goa. Admiral Prakash, let's come to the long-term impact of the coronavirus crisis on the armed services. Dearness allowance on government salaries and pensions has been frozen, and there's a widespread expectation that capital acquisition budgets for the armed services will be cut, if not slashed. And if that happens, that would have a serious impact on your modernization plan. So let me begin by asking you, how seriously are you concerned about this?
Well, to start with, things weren't looking too bright either, because when the budget came out this year, there were many items which had been long desired by the armed forces, which had been chopped already. So I think the armed forces had reconciled themselves to cutting their cloth according to whatever the resources were available. But now, if over and above the already shrunk defense budget, if more cuts are going to be imposed, and there's no getting away from that. I mean, the country is in dire financial straits. It's inevitable. So the armed forces have to find other ways of making sure that national security is not impacted or is impacted as little as possible by the economic crunch that is inevitably going to hit us.
Can I ask you very quickly, what are these other ways of ensuring that national security is not adversely impacted?
Well, there are many people who think that already our armed forces are too manpower intensive. We laid far more focus on manpower. We've got 1.5 million strong armed forces where technology could have helped much better. So this is the time when it's a force majeure that we are forced into a situation where resources are shrinking. We have no choice, no matter how much the armed forces complain and grumble, there is just not enough money to go around. So this is the time to switch from manpower intensive. I mean, a man is the most expensive item on our military budget. So switch from manpower to technology and reduce your armed forces and reduce your expenditure also. So there is cyber warfare. There are many ways that you can cut back on manpower and resort to technology and be more effective in the field and save money also. And if there's any time to do it, this is the time for defense reforms of a genuine nature.
How easy or how difficult would it be to actually shrink the size of the defense services, particularly at a time when, because of coronavirus and the lockdown, jobs are anyway disappearing, unemployment is growing? In that political atmosphere, how easy is it to start shrinking the armed forces?
Well, there will always be resistance from within the armed forces. They've never sort of advocated shrinking the size of the armed forces. But it's not a question of size, it's a question of expenditure also, because whatever you save from huge manpower intensive armed forces can be spent in other ways. First of all, it can be spent within the armed forces on technology to replace boots on the ground. there's so much technology available which we are not using. Even in our low intensity conflict areas, we are throwing in men where much more technology can be used. So, it will benefit the armed forces. It will bring down our casualty rates if we use more technology, and the same resources can be used elsewhere. I mean, if the armed forces are going to complain, the rest of the country too has grounds to complain, because there's a shortage of resources. People are going to be starving very soon.
Let's focus a little on the Navy in particular. In March, just before coronavirus hit India in a bad way, the Hindu had reported that this year's allocation for the Navy for capital expenditure didn't take into account existing liabilities. And that meant that new projects were out. Now, if you have further deeper cuts, even several more of those existing liabilities will be out as well. So, for the Navy, this is a particularly bad moment.
Yes, indeed, it is. It will send the Navy's plans for a six. But let's remember that in India, the armed forces tend to plan in isolation, because the political executive keeps at arm's length. They never commit that, all right, this plan is good enough, go ahead, we give it our approval, because they hedge. So if the Navy's plans are not going to work out, plan A is not going to work out, the Navy will just have to make do with plan B, plan C, with whatever resources the government makes available to the Navy.
Now,
It may not be an ideal situation, but we'll just have to make do.
Plan A for the Navy, as far as I know, was a target to become a 200-ship Navy by the year 2027. I believe at the moment the Navy has something like 130 ships, but there are 50 more in the pipeline, most of whom, I'm told, are actually not at the construction stage, but at the drawing board stage. So is that target of 200 ships by 2027 now very, very difficult to achieve?
Well, depending on how the situation works out at this moment, I think it looks very unlikely. And the Navy and the armed forces will just have to cut their coat according to the means available. I mean, you can't insist that just because the government promised us 200 ships, we must have them. So if you're going to get only 150 ships, maybe we have to be more innovative as far as tactics and strategy are concerned, and make sure we make the best use of whatever is available. We can't behave like spoiled children and insist on what the government promised us at one point of time. But let me also say that the government has been very clever. They have never committed to any fixed commitment. The commitment varies from year to year depending on how much is available. And really, the armed forces cannot complain about that.
What about the Air Force? It's no great secret that the Air Force is short of squadrons. The ideal number is said to be 42. Most people believe that we have something like 30 at the moment, which is only just above Pakistan's tally of 26, 27. How worrying is the situation facing the Air Force?
Well, it's worrying for everybody, but point is, when money is just not available, and if there are competing demands on your limited resources, then you have to be innovative and find other ways. If you can't have aircraft, then use missiles. I mean, I'm just giving you an example. The Indian Armed Forces will have to be very, very innovative and imaginative to make sure that whatever budget is available to them, they make sure that they can counter all threats within that budget available. And there is much that we've been far too complacent over the past few decades, because money was available. And there are other countries much smaller, with much smaller armed forces, who manage to counter threats which are almost as big as ours. So we just have to think harder.
You're saying the solution lies in admirals, air chief marshals, generals being innovative and imaginative, learning to cut their cloth according to the resources available. But that is also a change in mental attitude and thinking. How difficult would it be to make that change in attitude, to become innovative and imaginative in ways in which you haven't been and haven't felt the need to be?
Well, I'm afraid in other countries, these kinds of issues are not left to the military, because the military is trained to fight and fight within the country for its own resources, for the budget. So these kind of issues have to be imposed by the political executive. But in India, unfortunately, the political executive doesn't get involved in issues of national security, not involved enough. So these are the kind of things that the political leadership will have to lay out in front of the armed forces and say, this is the money available. Now cut your coat according to the resources available. And I'm sure that we can find ways and means to do it. It happens in every other country. In UK, there have been cuts after cuts after cuts. The armed forces keep complaining and grumbling, but they manage. So I think we also need to, and we need to think more innovatively. We've been too complacent, and money's been available, I think, far too easily.
We're also saying that there needs to be a complete change in the way in which national security issues are discussed, debated, and decided, both by the generals, the air chief marshals, and the admirals, and also by the politicians. They need to rethink this whole process because there are circumstances now that require them to do so.
No, national security is a political issue. The armed forces are only the executors of the political will. But unfortunately, in India, national security doesn't attract enough attention from the political executive. It's never debated in parliament. There are no white papers. So we just don't know which way we are heading. So I think it's time now that maybe it's a force majeure, that resources are extremely short. We have to cut our cloth according to whatever is available. So this is time for the political executive to sit down with the military and work out a way in which our limited resources can be used to the best advantage, and threats are not going away. Mind you, the PLA Navy has been very active. The Pakistanis, as you can see in Kashmir, are active. So this is a good time to think out of the box.
In fact, I want to end by taking up that point that you made. Threats are not going away. I want to take up two that are sometimes considered medium-term threats, but they may well be much more in the short term than we realize. The first is the enormous challenge the Indian Navy faces through the fact that the Chinese Navy is determined to play a high-profile role in the Indian Ocean. That was anyway a huge challenge before these financial constraints made themselves apparent. Now, after the financial constraints, how much more difficult has that challenge become?
Yeah, it's become a far more challenging issue now. I mean, we can't afford the luxury of constructing warships, buying more force. So we have to do with whatever little is available to us by strategizing, by evolving a new strategy how to counter the Chinese. The Chinese are on the up. I mean, they've acquired bases. They've got bases in the Persian Gulf. They've got all around us, and they're going to appear here in strength. So this is the time to think innovatively and see how, with whatever resources are available to us, how we can combat this threat from both sides. And let's not forget that it's a duo, this Pakistan on one side and China on the other. So we have to think really out of the box. Whatever we've been doing for the last 70 years is not good enough. It is too hidebound. It is too orthodox in its way. And we really have to think of new ways of resources are going to dwindle. The threats are perhaps going to increase. So we have to find a new way to get out of this combination.
Let me end, Admiral Prakash, by concentrating on China, which was very much the undercurrent in that answer you just gave me. Looking down the road, China is only going to grow stronger, both as an economic power, but also as a strategic threat. Has the time come for us not to divert our attention from Kashmir and Pakistan, but not to be obsessed by it either, and to concentrate in a much more focused way on China, and in particular on the increasing disparity between China's military preparedness and ours?
Well, first of all, I think no country can afford to have two fronts. I mean, everybody, all Machiavelli, Chanakya, everybody says if you have two enemies, then, you make up with one. So perhaps this is one of the things that we need to think about very carefully now, because we've got China, which is a main adversary, then they've got a proxy. So our resources and forces are divided. So perhaps this is time to think like Chanakya and make peace on one front. And thereafter you can focus all your resources and energies on the other front. So that's one thing we need to think about very, very carefully in the near future, and more so with the crisis that's upon us. Our resources are not going to increase, they're going to decrease. And also we need friends and allies wherever we can find them. So this is the time to start looking for them.
Very quickly, and this is my last question, when you say this is time to make peace on one front, which front do you think would be the one we should attempt first, Pakistan or China?
Well, I think Pakistan is only a puppet of China. So I think China is the main player, which is funding, resourcing, and perhaps even telling Pakistan what to do. So China is our main threat and our main adversary, and it will make far more sense for us to come to some kind of terms with China Pakistan will settle down automatically once China becomes a non-enemy or a friend of some sort.
And that means we need to make strenuous efforts to settle that border dispute. Perhaps even go back and pick up on some of the possibilities that were there in the 80s and try and revive them. But all our efforts should be settle that border dispute, make friendship with China so that we have peace on one front.
Well, we found out that sticking to entrenched positions is not getting us anywhere on either front. So we've got to do some fresh thinking. I mean, slogans and ultra patriotism, etc., is all right up to a point, but then pragmatism must cut in. So you have to see what positions you need to take, how to cut your coat, make friends on one side, so that you don't have two fronts. You just can't. We just cannot handle two fronts, no matter what, 2.5 fronts, as some of our soldiers have been saying. We just cannot handle that. So there is need for pragmatism and hard-headedness, and Chanakya has been telling us over the centuries what to do in situations like this. So let's listen to him.
Admiral Prakash has spoken very openly and candidly. I hope the politicians are listening to your advice. Thank you very much for speaking to me. Stay safe, sir, and take care.
Thank you, Karan. Likewise.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.